So we were going to mention a few of the homes that I've had recent calls on, and I'm like, I started writing them down, but I get pretty sloppy about that. But it's so funny because two of them in recent history had similar problems. But I thought first I'd go back uh, on do the repeating thing and talk about what questions do I ask when somebody calls me and says, Dave, I got this home I just can't seem to fix. Would you mind taking a minute and talking to me about it? Then here's the questions I ask, and this is getting very repetitive, but these are important. The question you need to ask yourself. First of all, what fan did you use? And the second question is, what's the manometer reading to see if the manometer reading is suitable for the fan you used? If and one of the calls I got this week was a competitor's a person that used competitor fans, and those questions when I asked him indicated right away that the fan he used, the comparable model to ours, was simply not enough fan. You can't put a you can't put the computer motor on a basement that's got sand under the floor and expect it to remove the radon. So I want to know what fan you used. I want to know what the manometer reading is with that fan so that we can kind of do a real quick analogy as to whether the fan is part of the problem. And then I want to know what the heck was the substrate material. We talked before. I can't answer about substrate material in anywhere but Central Illinois, but I hear some horror stories about the out west being built right on top of solid rock, where they have to use dynamite to even get the house built. And and then I hear a lot about the Carolinas. I hear about uh, um, Atlanta. I hear about places where there's awful high humidity. And then I've got Central Illinois, which I believe is, and Jim will probably agree with me, a total nightmare to be a radon guy in Central Illinois. If you like doing 1950s and 1960s homes. But so I want to know about the substrate material, and I want to know the age and the characteristics of the home and the size of the home as part of that. But in other words, when was this home built? What kind of home is it? How big is it? How big is that footprint? Uh, and then the most important question, the final question I ask them before we start having a discussion is, what do you think? What do you think went wrong, and what do you think you need to do? Why did you do 20 houses last month, and this is the only one that didn't make it? What do you think? Tell me what you think. And most of the times, I've jokingly said this before, but most of the times the guys are right on track. I mean, what am I going to tell them? They're the ones that are there, not me. So they'll come to me and they'll say, "Well, I think maybe it was this, and if I changed this or added this, I think it might help." And I'm like, you know what? That's exactly what I'd have told you, and you're telling me. So in other words, give yourself credit and trust your own instincts and your own experience, because I think it's great to have somebody to talk to. I really wish all the years I was a mitigator, I would have had a David Smith to talk to, because it was really discouraging not having a soul to talk to. Uh, and I'm more than willing to talk to anyone in these positions because I understand what it's like to be in that position. But I emphasize that you certainly don't want to sell your own self short. Don't think you're going to call anyone, me included. And I can say, you know what? I had a guy 2 weeks ago. Let me look at my Rolodex. I had a guy 2 weeks ago that called me with a home that had the same problem. And here's what we ended up talking about. And my requirement is you call me back and tell me when it succeeds. And that works about 50% of the time because once it succeeds, everybody's got to move on. But I also figure if they never call me back, either they realized or decided I wasn't didn't know what I was talking about, or it did succeed. And I'm sure that 90% of the time or 99% of the time it is because it succeeded. But I can tell you when you call me, I can tell you, you know what? I had a call 2 weeks ago. Same situation, same problem. Here's what we both talked together and did and decided, and it did fix it. So let's talk about what we did and see if there's any minor adjustments we need to make for what little differences you have. And there's the big advantage, as I've said 100 times, that I have. I have customers all over this nation, and I don't think there's very many of them that haven't had a problem home. So I get to talk to people that way. And so here's a couple of them that have happened recently, and I'm going to go back to a couple unique ones. But here's a couple have happened recently. I had a guy call me from the central United States, Iowa, and he said he was working on a home that was built in the 50s, and it was a ranch type home that had been added onto several times. And guess what? We all see that. Almost every one of the additions was on a crawl, some of them not accessible. So you get into all of these things too. You get a house that's built in the 50s. It's typically three small bedrooms and a little bitty kitchen and a living room. And everybody says, "Oh, well, now I want to add a family room or I want a master suite or something." So that ball starts rolling. And by the time the radon guy gets there, he doesn't know what the hell to do because the house is been changed so many times. But uh, I think that it's also a red flag when we see fluctuating radon, especially high fluctuating radon. So this guy thought he had fixed this house and it was reading okay when he left. Then all of a sudden it was fluctuating between 2 and 30. And I'm like, okay, now remember, you're looking for red flags here. First of all, 30 is a very high number for central Iowa. But secondly, fluctuation is always a red flag to try to figure out. So I said, let's just keep talking. What can you possibly think could make that thing spike to 30? What is different? I always ask, what's different about this house than the 20 or the 50 or the 100 you just finished that did succeed? What the heck is different? Let's really think about this. If you can be on site, go through this house. Well, he said, there's a well right outside this house has kind of got a walkout door, one of them old-fashioned walkout doors. And there's a well literally right outside this door, and all the pipes for that well come right into the basement. And he said, I was over there the other day and I could feel air blowing in. There was positive air coming in from outside. And I said, maybe I'm crazy, but if you got numbers spiking up to 30 and you got a well right outside the door, I would say the two things might have something in common. So I said, why don't you seal up everything you can and then just test that specific area? And luckily enough, he was able to fix it. But it just simply had to do with the fact that the well was so close to the home, and typically radon's going to be pretty deep or pretty high in a well, especially the old-fashioned wells. There's one thing about a deep well that's a submersible pump. It's another thing about the old-fashioned cistern type wells and the other hand dug type wells. So he was able to fix it by addressing the well entry point because the well wasn't in the home. He just had to focus on that area to make sure that what was infiltrating the home from the well was addressed. And so then the second call I get about the same thing, it's a well, and the guy says, let me refer to my notes. Um, he says, well, Dave, I don't know what to do with this house because I've got the same thing. I've got fluctuation. And I said, well, tell me about the house. Same kind of an old house. And I said, well, he said the homeowner has a homeowner test device. So he had a good old radon eye or cranium. I said, well, that's going to help you because what's it telling you? And he's telling me that it's fluctuating and it's failing. And I said, well, explain the home. Well, this home actually had, and you guys that do radon will all acknowledge this too. Some homes have a well room right in the basement, and it just takes up a little corner of the basement. But he says, well, there is a little bitty room that is the well room. and it's sectioned off though, and my suction point is really only 4 or 5 feet from that room, so I wouldn't think it would be a problem. And I said, well, close the door to the well room and put the homeowner's test device in there and call me in the morning, because let's determine, there's your unusual thing about this home. Let's determine whether this well room is influencing the numbers or not. Well, so he calls me next morning, and the numbers in the well room were over 100 picocuries, and he was just shocked. What should I do? He said, I never dreamed of numbers that high. I've never had numbers that high. And I'm like, well, you shut the door and it was concentrated, but it's obvious that your well room has infiltration somehow. He said, well, my suction point's pretty close to that well room. It should take care of that. I said, you don't know that. We don't know where the footings are. Is there a footing right between the well room? Is there something keeping you? Now you could do any kind of test you want. You can do a smoke test. You can do micromanometer. You can do anything you want to test that room, but if you've already identified it as being high. So what I want you to do is, first of all, caulk everything you can possibly caulk in that room. I mean, walls and floor, but try to seal the infiltration points. But if you've got 100 picocuries in that room and you seal the infiltration points, it's going to be temporary because the radon's going to find its way to get through. So I don't care if you are 5 feet away with your suction point. I want another one in that well room, and I want you to put a 2-inch pipe into the floor of that well room, and I want you to put a valve on it. And I want you to leave that homeowner device in there, and I want you to adjust that valve until it's below 3. You can play with that valve, or the homeowner can play with that valve, but I don't want a whole bunch pulling from there, but I want that room to be below 3. Because if that room's below 3, it is no longer your problem. So if you're right and I'm right, now that we've identified how high this well room is, and it is the problem, we're going to know, because you're going to have this well room valved down until the homeowner monitor says it's 2.5. And sure enough, the numbers just became great by doing that. But it usually has to do with something unusual about the home. And so both of these had to be about that, about a well, so to speak. But it just so happened they both came in the same week. Um, but just remember that typically a spike means something, and there's almost always something unusual about a home that does this. It's got to be something making it do that. Otherwise, like I say, the other 20 you did in the same neighborhood didn't do it. So what's different about this one?
Got a question over at Facebook, Dave. Somebody's asking, Jason Quinn asked, just curious if you'll be making a new airflow chart for the additional fans, for the new fans.
Yes, I've been pressing Festa for that, and really, really want him to prioritize that. And the new fans, he wants them to go through 4 different test organizations so that he can benefit from that. And the fourth test organization has not submitted results or has not been done one way or the other. But I'm pressing him because my customers rely on that flow chart, and I encourage them all to keep it on their phone so they can refer to it at a job. And as I said earlier, there's a lot of different theories about fixing radon and problems with radon and solving radon problems. And there are plenty of people out there that think fan and manometers have nothing to do with it. I just happen to disagree with it, and I'm a full believer that the fan and the substrate material and the manometer reading are the number one way we've cured almost any problem. But that's not true for everybody. If you can cure the problem with something else, then that's great. It's all about curing the problem. So, for instance, um, I'll tell you a little bit about another unusual home, but we went up north of here for a problem home that I'm going to get repetitive again, but the state called us about and said, "Boy, this is a real problem home. Is there any way you think you can go up there and fix it? It's becoming kind of a big deal." I said, "I don't know. There's some pretty handy guys up there. If they didn't fix it, don't think I'm going to fix it, but let me go up there and look at it." Well, this house was built on a river rock quarry, and we're talking about the rock, the nice 1 inch rock that you'd love to have around the outside of your home, and you pay a premium money for it. And my understanding is this rock was about a mile deep. And so I thought, well, no, that could be challenging too, because you can't even really put your footings on anything solid, so to speak. I'm sure they tamped it and did whatever they could to build footings. It was a beautiful ranch home, and a pretty large footprint. But the river rock sure created questions to me. But we get up there and we find that the radon mitigation company that had worked on this home had put two uh, powerful fans as far as volume, Legend fans. They will pull a lot of volume. They'd put one on each end of the basement because the first one they put in didn't do the job. So they said, well, we'll just put another full system on the other end, just out of not knowing what else to do. But we also found that the manometer readings were almost unreadable. That manometer reading was so low. I mean, it was like an eighth of an inch that you couldn't hardly, unless you got eye to eye with the oil in the manometer, you couldn't tell there was any difference. And I said, well, you know, that's something that's pretty unusual there. I'm used to seeing some pressure, but there was literally so much river rock under this home that there was no pressure at all. So I said, let's pull these pipes out. I don't want any exterior suction points because it's obviously bleeding to the exterior. And I always have a joke where I say, we're not trying to lower the radon in the dog kennel out back. We're trying to lower the radon under the basement floor. So my theory to begin with was let's put the suction points more to the inner portion of the home. And typically I would have done what this first radon guy did also. But having seen those manometers like that, and having seen the fluctuation, by the way, was between 75 and 220 picocuries. So we had some numbers that were freaking scary to begin with also. And I hadn't seen 220 picocuries yet. But anyway, uh, so we moved the suction points to the center of the home and used the same style fans and added one under the garage floor. And when I drilled horizontally under the garage floor, there literally I know it was a waterfall of river rock. Just it must have been I could see a couple feet deep, and it just really reinforced what I'd heard about this home being built on a rock quarry. And so we put an additional, uh, it was a 2,200, 2,400 square foot basement, so it's a big footprint. We literally put two suction points on one end, and then the other end we put one on the floor, one in the floor and one under the garage. But all of them were centrally located, and my theory was let's at least make the escape route for the radon start from the center and work out instead of start from the outer wall and possibly go past the footing to the earth outside the home. So that was a theory, and I get done, and there was some success, but it still didn't work. And so I'm like, holy cow, I finally got this place down where the fluctuation was better, but I was still dealing with numbers that had been up to 220, but they were still up in the 30s. And so being it just was so unique that I decided the only way to fix this home was to do a very rare system that I was never proud that I had to do this, but I did a push pull on it where I took the two suction points on, let's call it the south end, that were both in the floor, and I turned the fan upside down and I pressurized the basement. But the two suction points on the other end of the floor, one under the garage and one in the floor, I left them positive. So in other words, I decided to dilute the air under the basement and create what was called a push pull. And like I say, I was never proud of what I had to do there. So I introduced air on the south end of this home and flooded the river rock with outdoor fresh air. And then at the same time it was flooding with the same time fan, I'm pulling it out the other end. And lo and behold, it was just a guess on my end, but lo and behold, the numbers went down to 1.7. And so I left this guy with, I believe at the time, I left him with a corinium. They weren't quite as advanced as they are now, but I left him with a corinium and I said, look, I want you to call the professional tester back every year. And I want you and I to know the results. And I want you to keep an eye on this little device here. And if I'm not going to say it's really accurate, but if it does any fluctuating at all, I want you to call the tester back then, because what I had to do here was very unorthodox, and I'm not confident of it. And lo and behold, 7 years later, his numbers were still 1.7. And the tester used to call me up every year. He did for several years. He'd call me up and say, Dave, you're not going to believe this, but the numbers are exactly what they were when you left. And I'm like, okay, we'll take that success, but I don't want any credit for it. I wasn't happy with what I did, but it just goes to show you that sometimes um, you don't know what the hell to do. But I, I hope that's an experience that nobody has to go through. But you see numbers getting up to 200 picocuries, you better think there's something going wrong.
David, I
And what?
before I
Oh,
go
go
too
ahead.
far, I know that Jim had a comment, and I didn't want you to go too far into something else. If he wanted to comment on that topic, so uh, Jim, are you still there? There you are.
I'm here. Yeah, yeah. When he was talking about wild fluctuation, and me and David, we do share the same service area, the same kind of stuff. And I totally agree with him on the cisterns and the wells. When I see high radon numbers, I'm always looking for something unusual because in our area, 7/8 is pretty typical for us around here. So when you get into something 100, there's usually something unusual going on. But what I was thinking of was the tile to the field,
Yes.
which I've seen really high rate on. And the farmer's decided that he's going to tile his basement out into the cornfield there, and he's just mining radon right in the house.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I've seen it, yeah. And then we have a lot of engineers in our area,
Yeah.
and they like to overbuild homes
Yeah.
and get away from standard building practices.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you get really weird things going on.
Yeah.
Literally last week, I was looking at an underground house, and the way the guy constructed it, he had bearing walls every 10 feet, kind of like almost like shelving. And he put his metal decking on top of that and buried their house. And literally, there was no way to try to fix this home with like a traditional ASD system, just because you'd have pipes everywhere through the house. It was all finished off. And the best I could offer him is, try an ERV, maybe that'll do it for you. But it just, when people build weird houses, you're going to get weird things,
Yes. Yes.
you know,
I'm not a fan
and
of pressure.
sometimes you just can't work with that construction.
Well,
Yeah.
correct. And
So,
I
and then
had,
you're,
go ahead.
on your comment about the push pole, I just learned about this last year. But in Florida, they're telling me that they cannot use traditional ASD systems there because of the it creates mold in their homes. So that's what they do down there is push pull and blow it out the other side.
Ah,
And it was something wild and never heard of, but that's, I guess a guy was telling me that's what they have to do down there because of the construction types they have there, the construction of the building.
I'll be darned. I'll be darned.
So
Uh,
everything's unique.
yeah, yeah, and I'm not a fan of pressurization. I've seen it work occasionally, but I had a guy. You talk about unique homes. I had a guy here in Central Illinois with a hex home. One of the I think it's kind of almost a prefab thing, and he said, well, how am I going to run an exterior pipe on a hex home that I got nothing to mount the pipe to, you know? And I said, well, why don't you just, since it's a small home, why don't you just turn that fan upside down and see if you can pressurize it and fix it? And sure enough, it worked. But you're right, you get into so many unique situations, and I don't want to get carried too far off track, but I think the most unique one I did, I always asked the question in a meeting, what's the highest numbers ever mitigated in Illinois? And the number is 18,000 picocuries. And it was because we were contracted to mitigate the vessel that the Nuclear Safety Commission puts all their stuff in every month because they have it buried or taken to a site once a month. But if you get some little nuclear material that they have a shipping vessel just like you see going down on the railroad cars and coming in on the ships. They have a vessel like that they, that they put all their small stuff in, and then when it gets full or once a month or whatever, they got it out in the back of the lot, but they take it and do whatever they do with nuclear waste. But they started testing that, and all those people that work down there wear some kind of a badge that also identifies high levels. But they started testing and finding out that with that stuff sitting in there, it was getting to be some really high numbers. So in other words, we were called to mitigate the shipping vessel that the Nuclear Safety Commission uses to store their small nuclear waste stuff in, and so that was the most unique radon system we ever did, but that's off track. Uh, I always found it interesting though that you uh, that you actually mitigated a shipping container, but I guess now people are building houses out of them anyway. Um, I wanted to cover just a little bit too, that just as an example, for instance, I've spoken about this before. I try to keep things more residential, but we were contracted to do something with the Normal Public Library, and as Ben knows, it's right on the Illinois State University campus. It's a big library, big popular library. So we were contracted to do that, and the president or the director of that library he got real concerned about it. I think his librarians that was pressuring him a little bit. Well, anyway, he said, "What can I do in the meantime?" And I've told this story before, but I want to add something to it. I said, "Well, in the meantime, get a hold of your HVAC person and ask him if he can increase the exchanges per hour and increase the pressurization of the building." And I said, have him talk to me. Well, this guy that was the HVAC guy says, well, that's two things that typically kind of work against each other, but I understand what you're asking. So I will try to do that. I'll increase the air exchanges per hour, and I'll try to also increase the pressurization with my abilities to do that. And so we set, I don't know, I think we set about 10 very good homeowner, we still refer to them, homeowner devices. We set them on the shelves of the library offices. Thought we were hiding them, but those sneaky librarians can find anything. But we were hiding them on the office shelves. And before this guy did that, we were getting numbers typically 7 and 8. We had one office that was 17, and it happened to be a very long-standing librarian's office. But anyway, when he did that, all the numbers went down to 3 or a little less by him simply tweaking the air exchanges and the pressurization of the building. And so when we go in there to start do our work, of course, all the librarians were saying, "Hey, I'm looking at this thing. I'm wondering why the city's paying you or why the library system is paying you to do this. It looks to me like we don't need you anymore." So I'd have to explain it to them. But and then the sort of unique part was when I got done, I go back to this HVAC expert and I say, "Look, we're done. You can take the HVAC system back to where it was." And he says, "The truth of it is, I like the way the building's running so much now, I'm going to leave it where it is." And so the joke of the matter is maybe it didn't need us there. But you need to remember two things. I want to say two things about relying on HVAC to help you and balancing. It even works in a home. Sometimes the balancing's a part of your problem. But uh, that lowering of radon by using the HVAC system to change the air exchanges per hour and the pressurization of the building is only good when that guy's in charge. The next guy that takes his place, when he gets a big promotion, is going to say, well, this is crazy. I'm not going to do this. So without that radon system, or without some kind of a contract where it's at least kept monitored, then it goes right back to it. And the other thing is, I worked at Illinois State University for 25 years. A lot of people don't know that, but there was a lot of discussion there, and there's still discussion in schools. Well, now wait a minute, we can make these buildings better by doing the same thing, so to speak. So if we don't need to do a radon system, we don't need to do a radon system. And I'm like, I believe in that, and I'm all for that. But I worked at a university where it only took one guy sitting at a desk to punch the right button at the heating plant to change that. Number one. Now you can overcome that, but all of these buildings are also taken offline from that pressurization and that air exchanges at night. And every one of them have night building service workers. And I'm like, at what point do we believe that that student is more important than that night worker? So just remember that um, anytime you get into something bigger, I'm a believer that if we can fix radon through the help of HVAC, I'm all for it. But remember the limitations. I'm not going to put these guys were my friends, and these ladies were my friends that worked at night at the university, and it wasn't fair for them to be subjected to high radon just because I knew for a fact that it was automated enough that the HVAC system did a total reverse after the students went home. So it was just something I wanted to add, but um, I think we're about to close out here. I didn't get a chance to say anything, but there's been some real Ben, I'll just touch a minute on this,
Yeah.
but there's been some real problems in the industry in the last week or so, and some real, I think, very unethical things have happened in the industry lately, having to do with accusations about radon fans. And we'll let those people settle that. We don't need to do these things under a negative context, but ethics is a personal thing, and I believe it's been extremely unethical. And if any of you folks that buy fans from me or consider buying fans from me have any questions, there's been an accusation that our fans are not legal and are going to have to be pulled off homes. And these accusations have come fairly high up, and that is simply not true. I can provide the proof. ETL testing laboratory will provide the proof. Festa will provide the proof. It's simply untrue. So I don't want anybody to say, well, I kind of like dealing with Dave Smith, but after I saw this letter that came out, or I read this article that came out, I just don't think I can buy fans from him anymore because it told me I was going to have to pull off the fans I installed. So you guys know me better than that, and we're going to leave it at that. If you have any doubts whatsoever, I've got proof beyond belief that it is simply was simply an unethical thing that was done.
Well, the
So,
good news is nobody reads anything anymore, so you're good. So,
yeah, like the manometer labels,
right.
right?
Hey guys, thank you for joining us this week. Next week, we've got a great topic. I'll be sending out some information about that here real soon, and we're going to be talking about what it looks like to move on and to potentially sell your business. And for those of you who have that as an objective, we want to talk about it. Obviously, that is something that I reference Dave a lot because he's certainly a public figure in the industry who has sold his mitigation business. successfully. I know a lot of people have either sold it unsuccessfully or haven't sold it. So, there is an exit strategy, and we want to talk about the those things next week. And so some of it's going to be kind of a Q&A with Dave, but we're going to be talking about ways to set you up for success, to maximize the value of your business when it's done. So it's not just the money you're making while you're working we talked about this before, but if you have a job or a business, a job is something that can't survive without you, and a business is something that can. So, and it has a value. So we want to make sure that you're part of that. So Dave is off to run track, right?
Yes, off to a grandchild track meet.
Yeah. And that's why we do this, right? So we build our businesses so that we have the flexibility and the opportunities to be part of our kids' lives, our friends' lives, and to make things better for all those people that we love. And that's obviously we're saving lives with what we're doing, but it's important.
Well, and I'm looking forward to your input, Ben, about helping guys that want to sell their business, because I do get that question a lot where I get an old guy, almost as old as me,
Yeah.
that will say, I sure wish I could find somebody to buy this business. And so
Yeah.
I think that Ben's input's going to be really handy, because it is an often asked question, and it is something that all of us should think about for the future, because the future, if you have two or three sons, you might not have to worry about it too much. But most mitigators will come to a point that they're like, what do I do now? I'm tired of crawling around crawl spaces, and my body doesn't want to do that anymore. So,
well, I'll tell you, if you got
forward.
two or three sons, you don't just give it to them either, right? And so
That
that is you're either giving them their inheritance on day one. But yeah, for on my side, if I were buying the business, not only would I ask, can it run on its own, but I'm also asking how many leads are coming in per week. What's your average close rate? What's your average, on the business sides of things, those numbers are very, very important. And so,
Yeah.
we're going to be we're going to be looking at this as if there's a business in Colorado and Dave and I want to go in on it and we want to buy it together, but we're not going to run it. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to be, investors that own that business. Can that thing run on its own? Right. And we just collect the profit. And so, and obviously, we pour money in when it's not turning a profit. So those are the things that you have to look at. And so, that's what we're going to talk about next week. It's going to be a really good conversation, and we hope that you guys can join us. And I think that's it. Enjoy the sunshine and the weather, and go out and make some money.
Goodbye, everybody.
See you guys. Thank you.